Hello and welcome everyone, I'm TheSparrowsJourney and this is WildStar. We're going to be taking a quick look at one of the first dungeons you have in WildStar. This is called the Stormtalons Lair. Why is it called that? Maybe because it's a home of a creature called Stormtalon. Bingo. Now if you choose the Exile faction, this should be the first dungeon you will be able to do. Let's not confuse it with adventures, which you already have one in level 15, which is called the High Crest Insurrection. Now the Stormtalons Lair, even though it's located in the Exile territory, it's accessible by the Dominion faction if you choose the Looking for Group window. That's a quick and easy way to do it. There's also a level 20 dungeon called Ruins of Kel'Vorath, which is located in the Dominion territory, which the Exile can also do by the Looking for Group window. You can go directly in there by the normal means, mounts or teleports or whatever, but it's quickly accessible by the Looking for Group window. You can do it after level 20, you cannot do it before level 20. If you want to do these dungeons before level 20, you have to go there physically and enter the dungeon. Now the Stormtalons Lair is a place run by guys called Thunder Call or Thunder Call Pell. These guys are mysterious. They are these sort of birdie looking guys, big creatures. And there was an Exile Academy of Science that decided to throw some guys in there into the lair to see what was going on, because there's a source of energy they want to investigate. And guess what? They got lost, they eventually died, no one knows about them, so someone wants you to go there. So that's what you're gonna do. Now, this dungeon is composed by 3 bosses and 2 optional bosses. The first one is the one you're already looking at, Wind the Invoker. There's also Aethrus, that's the second boss, and there's 2 optional bosses, Oversea Drift Catcher and Arcanist Breeze Binder, and that's the final boss called Stormtalon. Now this first boss, Wind the Invoker, I'm preparing myself, eating some food. I'm gonna change to normal speed in order for you to see it how it goes. So there's 4 mobs, if you notice, around him. There's basically 2 important phases in this fight, or let's call it 3 phases, but there's 2 very different ones. The first one is basically tank and spank. You just have to avoid the telegraphs, that big crossed telegraph in the middle of the screen. If you are the tank, you will supposedly and theoretically be the only one being damaged. Now we've just entered the second phase, if I'm not mistaken, and the second phase is basically defeating those 4 mobs around him, because Wind the Invoker is mainly 2 things. He always has one part shielded. It's either the boss that is shielded or these 4 mobs shielding them, or they can also be shielded. So the first phase, you have the boss taking damage and the mobs shielded. The second phase, the boss is shielded and the 4 mobs are taking damage. So what you gotta do in this second phase, as you're watching, is basically DPS down these mobs that are protecting the boss itself. And at the end of this phase, with the 4 mobs dead, we will return back to the first phase, which is basically, it's phase 3, but it's basically the first phase, but with another ability called Electrostatic Pulse. But we're gonna get to that in a second. Now, this phase, you also have some sort of lightning coming down on you with a telegraph that appears before that. What you want to do is having this telegraph on these mobs. You want to hit them with this telegraph. That is a boss ability. Let's call it Thunder Strike, whatever. Because this ability not only damages you, but it also damages the mobs that you gotta DPS down. So to further speed up this phase and to be more efficient at it, you wanted to DPS down these mobs while keeping that telegraph on the mob so it gets damaged by the boss itself. The boss is turning on now. That's good. That's what you want to do. So the third phase would be very similar to the first one, but with a new ability called Electrostatic Pulse, which is a big telegraph that takes the entire room with just a safe spot that you gotta keep on with the remaining of your group. Also, this is the telegraph that I was meaning. Also, when you destroy those 4 mobs, each one spawns a whisper, or yeah, I guess it's just a whisper that you gotta be careful with. Obviously, you don't want to step on it because it does damage. It stuns you even, I think. It keeps you in place, and you don't want that. I forgot to mention that I went into this dungeon as a tank with tank abilities, but I gotta say I was doing a lot other than tank, just because I didn't choose the correct abilities, and this was actually the first dungeon where I chose somewhat a tank spec and tried to tank, but I was doing everything wrong. Even the rotation, because there's one interesting thing about WildStar, and now talking a little bit about specs. For instance, as an engineer, you don't want to choose every ability on the tank spec, as odd as this might seem, because that's exactly what I did, and that's wrong. You gotta choose a group of abilities that allow you to be efficient at every situation. That's not what I did. I chose every ability available to me in the tank spec, and that eventually led to a bad tanking. That's what you're watching, but I'm not too worried about that. I just want to show you the dungeon itself, how it rolls. Now I've returned fast forward so that we can go through these trash mobs. Now we're gonna get into a room where those 2 optional bosses are located. Now, you might want to do it or not. We did it. I only think that's important to do one of the bosses, because behind him there's located one of the spawning points when you die. So it gets closer than the start of the dungeon itself. Talking about trash, it's not too difficult. There's one type of trash that I didn't really like, which had a healer, and you gotta DPS him down fast, because, well, it heals. So you want to DPS that one first. Now, if you activate this elevator and get up here, you actually encounter this optional boss, which is called Overseer Drift Catcher. And it's basically tank and spank, as you can see on the screen. There's not too much about it, if you ask me. And it drops some loot, just like any normal boss does. I do believe that it's not a type of loot that is as good as normal bosses, but it drops some sort of pieces as well. So it's your choice to DPS him down or not. Returning to the normal course of the instance, these guys are some bad guys, and I did a bad pull there. Either I or a guy near me pulled that second mob as well. So we eventually wiped, and after cleaning up all the room, we returned to the normal course, and we are on the second boss, the second optional boss. That's what I wanted to mean. It's called Arcanist Breeze Binder, and if I recall correctly, he doesn't have any type of specific tactic as well, just mostly tank and spank. And here's the guy, and behind him there's what I've wanted to mention, the cemetery. It's a spawning point when you die, because after you die, if you die in, for instance, the last boss, it shouldn't happen actually, because it's an easy boss, you gotta return to the start of the instance. So if you complete this boss, this mini boss, whatever, optional boss, you get a cemetery there. That's very useful. So you can already recognize this type of trash when you reach the second boss, the second actual boss. He's called Aethros, and he's a tornado guy, basically. And people say it's the easiest boss in the instance. we actually had some trouble with it. That's because there's a very specific thing which you gotta do in this fight, which we failed most of the times, which is interrupting. That's always important. People always saying, well, let's DPS, and they forget the useful things. So you gotta interrupt him at a certain point, which I'm gonna try and explain when. So here he is, here are the tornadoes, and here I go in front because I'm the tank. Now the first phase, it's basically simple tank and spank, and moving out of the telegraphs. That's basically it, and that will be pretty simple to explain in every boss, but that's actually the truth. Just tank and spank, you shouldn't give much trouble in this phase. Now, after a moment, I'm not sure of if there's a percentage, if there's a time, whatever. You will call an ability called Air Shift, and it disappears, it dissipates, and these 3 mobs appear. This is some sort of phase 1B, where you want to DPS these 3 mobs down. And when this happens, you obviously want to do it as fast as possible. You will be pushed to the one end of the room, but normally it's the start where you started the fight. And Aethrus will be at the other end of the room, as you are actually seeing right now. What you gotta do in this phase is stopping him from casting a powerful spell which is called Tempest, which undoubtedly will end in you wiping your group and end the fight, and you will be defeated. What else you want me to say? You will be defeated. So what you're gonna do is, when you're pushed to the other side of the room, you want to get to it as fast as possible and interrupt him. It will take you about 3 interrupts. I'm not sure if this might be 2, might be 3. I think it's 3 interrupts. Because there's one thing in WildStar which I haven't seen in other MMOs, which is interrupting armor, or it might be a different name, but that's basically what it is. So it has like 3 interrupting armor. So if you interrupt him once, you will have 2 armor. If you interrupt him twice, you will have 1 armor. And eventually, on the last interrupt, you will be interrupted because his interrupting armor will go away. That's basically how it works. It might be not with these certain words. That's basically how it works. So, again, we're in the second phase where you must run at him. He's almost dead, and I end up dying, and I'm now changing my key bindings. Why? Because my freaking keyboard is so sensible and it's linear that I often click twice in the same key to movement, and I dash, and I don't want to dash, and that eventually kills me. So my group will finish the boss. Unfortunately, I was not able to see him die. But this is Aethrus' fight. It is phase 1, simple, tank and spank. Phase 2, get to him as fast as possible and interrupt him about 3 times. This is what you need to do. Back to the fast forward part. We're gonna kill and get rid of the rest of the trash mobs and get to the final boss called Stormtalon. This is perhaps the most difficult part of the trash mobs, where you often encounter 2 mobs alone, I mean, where they heal. One of them heals. It's the shaman one, and you want to kill that one first. You also encounter these tornadoes, these mini Aethros guys. Should be the sons of Aethrus or whatever. And they're quite difficult, and as you can see here, I died. Now, we didn't have such a good healer because he didn't have proper gear to heal. I myself didn't have very good gear for tanking. So, all in all, I've died a few times. It's comprehensible. I also tanked bad as hell, but that's another thing. I really like the fact that you can mark mobs without even being the leader. That happened a lot in World of Warcraft. You have to be the leader to mark mobs. And as you can see here in this screen, you want to DPS the marked one first, the shaman. Actually, my group is actually doing the opposite thing, unfortunately. Now, as an engineer, you are really motivated to DPS everything in front of you, because all of your abilities are AoE, so getting close to the final boss. It's called Stormtalon, and he's supposedly the most strong boss in this dungeon. He's after all the last one. And we're gonna watch some sort of cinematic while the guy is spawned. Our first attempt wasn't actually the most successful one, so I'm gonna even skip that one.
Behold the power of Stormtalon.
Here he is. A pretty massive one, if you ask me. So I've changed to the successful attempt. It's actually the second one. And just because there's again one very critical point which you must know, which is interrupting the guy, which is actually now, I believe. Interrupt armor. There you go. That's what I was mentioning earlier. It's not interrupting. It was interrupting. Okay, so phase one. Phase one. It's very common to mix phases in this boss because it quickly changes from one to the other. There's two phases in the Stormtalon boss, and it quickly changes from one to the other. So you gotta be careful with what it does, because there's no such thing as, okay, he's now in phase one, careful with this. No, it quickly changes from one to the other. So there's a front cleave, which you must be careful with. So the guy shouldn't be facing the group, that's the first one. And there's a lightning telegraph that regularly spawns on the two players of the group, so you gotta be careful with that as well. If you're one of the players that has that telegraph, you gotta be moving and be careful when the telegraph stops. When the telegraph actually stops, you must move as well so that you don't get hit. And eventually the guy will expose everyone around him to the edge of the room, and you will stun you. In this part, you gotta hit one key as fast as you can to freedom yourself from that point, and start moving to the boss while avoiding the tightening telegraph that will deal damage. And in this phase, you gotta interrupt him. We've already seen that. You gotta interrupt him so that he doesn't cover all the entire room and wipes the group. The phase 2 is when Stormtalon covers the entire room with a telegraph, with the exception of a small safe spot, which is what you're seeing right about now. Now this player will be focused with that safe spot. What you gotta do is basically keep that safe spot on your group, and the other group, the remaining guys of the group, must follow that player in order to survive, because that will always be the safe spot. Stormtalon will change between these two phases, and people say that he's the most easiest boss of the dungeon. It's somewhat chaotic, but yeah, it's not that hard. I'm TheSparrowsJourney. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!